Let's get started with the animation. Basically, I want this coffee machine to come in first. So let's go to my coffee machine. I'll go to position property here, and then I want to animate inside value graph. So I'll right click separate dimension, and then I'll click on, let's go to 0 second here. I'll click on this keyframe here, add one keyframe. This is going to be my final position. So I'll go for 20 frames. Move this keyframe to 20 frames. So this is going to be final position. And then at 0 second, I want to be outside of the frame here. So I'll just shoot in here like this. If I just solo the background and solo the coffee machine, we'll only see these two elements for now. That's good. And let's go inside. Let me easy ease it. F9, go to the graph editor. Make sure we're inside the value graph here. Click on this button. And then let's go to the X position, fit graph to view. Let me drag this back up a little bit more. Now, for this case, I don't need a anticipation because it's outside of the frame. And for an animation like this, when it's shooting in, I'll do this S-curve here. And then I'll add in some overshoot, just a little bit. Let me go to the last frame and then move 3 keyframes forward, maybe like 4. Let's do 4 frames. Command right arrow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 frames, and then hold down Command, click on here to add a keyframe, and then let's do 2 frames. So remember the time decay that we talked about. We'll do 4 frames and then 2 frames. That's time decay. And then we need to zoom in, hit on Z on the keyboard, zoom in this area a little bit more, and then I'll drag this first one down so that it's overshooting, and then drag the second one up so it's oscillating back and forth from this final position. Just want to drag it slightly here, and then we're gonna modify this handle a little bit, drag it out so that we can form a S-curve, give it a bit more easing. If I pull this one back, I'll drag this curve more. I don't want to go too much, drag the handle for too long, otherwise this is going to be more cartoony feeling. The more dramatic, the more cartoony it's going to feel. So for this case, maybe I want to go for a more natural bounce at the end. So let's see the animation here, preview it. It's nice. However, if we add a little bounce like this, it still feels like a bit cartoony at the end. I want to go for more like a natural feeling, just a really slight bounce at the end. I want to make it more gentle and then tone it down even more. Let me go uncheck this auto zoom graph height here so that we can zoom in really close to this overshoot keyframe. Hit Z on the keyboard, just zoom in really close. I'll pull this one down a bit more, pull this one down a bit more, so it's really close to the final position. Let's see the animation here. Yeah, you see that slight, really slight, gentle easing at the end, overshoots. It's barely noticeable, but you can feel that the momentum is kind of carrying this coffee machine forward and then bounce back a little bit so that you can feel the weight of it. However, it's not so bouncy because we just did the really close zoom into the overshoot and then make sure the value is really subtle. It's not really something that's really noticeable, but you can actually feel it. There's weight to the coffee machine. So that's kind of the goal for the anticipation and overshoots. Sometimes you want to keep natural. You tone down the value and then it still got character to the object, to the movement. However, it's more natural. It's not like dramatic or it's not cartoony. So that's the coffee machine I want. That's pretty good. Next, I'll go to the croissant. Let me just pull up the croissant here. This is my layer here. Let me go back to the timeline. I'll click on this solo button. I'll solo this one here. So we have 3 elements in the scene turned on: the background, the coffee machine, and the croissant. And then for the croissant, I'll just reinforce the movement we have left and right. I'll just slide it in from the left. Sometimes when you're animating, you also want to think about the physical forces that's at play and what are the forces that's driving your animation. And those forces has to be more realistic, right? If you are doing something that's more of a realistic setup, although it's illustration, but it's more realistic kind of illustration. So thinking about the forces, it could be someone pushing this croissant on the table and then slide it in just like how the coffee machine come in. So it has to kind of have a force that being at play. If you want to do like a drop from the top, it could be a gravity pulling someone just throw this one, but it doesn't really make sense if this one just come in from the top and then bounce on the floor, on the table or something like that. Like it wouldn't happen. No one in the real world would just, drop the coffee machine on the table and then it would bounce. So it doesn't even make sense. So in that case, like just think about the realistic forces that's being applied on these elements and use that as like a first layer of thought so that you can start thinking about the movement that it could have. And in this case, the really most common or like the first reaction might be just these two, because we have a tabletop. We have a ground here, right? So we have a line that's forming a ground. It could be a tabletop, and then it's sliding on the table, right? So that's going to be the thought on the forces is being played on these objects so that they can slide on the table. And for this one, we'll just do another slide in. So go to position, and then we go to right click separate dimension. And then we click on the X position for the final position. Let's go for 20 frames. And in this case, right now, we're just on the left-hand side of the frame. And thinking about being on the left-hand side, I just want it to be outside of the frame and then shooting in. The traveling distance is really short. So let's say if I add a keyframe on 20 frames here, this is going to be my final position. Go back to 0. I'll move this one to the left. This is going to be my original position, so it will slide in here like this. However, the traveling distance of these two keyframes is really short. So in that case, I need to think about the timing I have now might be too much because we have 20 frames and the traveling distance is really short. So I might want to just shrink it down to around 10 frames. So let's go for 10 frames, Command Shift right arrow, and then pull this keyframe to 10 frames. Now it makes more sense because we only have this short distance to cover so that we don't need 20 frames for the animation to happen. You can use 20 frames as a starting point for the animation, but we always want to think about the context and the distance is traveling. In this case, it's a short distance. Let's shrink it down to 10 frames. Let's go select both keyframes, F9, easy ease, go to the graph editor, make sure we're inside the value graph, hit the position, fit the graph to view. Same thing here. I can either do a easing in from the start, shooting in, or I can do an S-curve here. So it depends on, it can give you a slight different animation. It depends on how you like it. In this case, I think it will not be making much of a difference at the beginning because you really cannot see here. So as first, I can either just do this. The last one we did an S-curve. You can try both, but I think it's not going to make much difference. The only difference it's going to make is the overshoot here. So let's go for the overshoot. Remember, we tone it down to 10 frames. So last layer for the coffee machine, we did a 4-frame overshoot and then a 2-frame overshoot. In this case, since the animation is only 10 frames, we don't want to overpower the actual animation. So let's do a 2-frame overshoot and a 1-frame overshoot. So we still have that time decay, but it's a small movement. It doesn't have to be too exaggerated. So we're doing a 2-frame overshoot and a 1-frame overshoot. So let me zoom in here, hit Z on the keyboard, zoom in really close, and then move this one up slightly, move this one down so we can oscillate between the final position here, final value. I'll drag the curve out more to form an S-curve. Let's see if that makes sense here. So the value is too small that I can't even really see it. So I will just pull this one up more, pull this one down a little bit more. Let's see that. Let me just pull this one up more, pull this one down even more. Just want to get to a point where it's still visible, but it doesn't feel too much. Yeah, this one, now it feels a bit too much. So I would just pull this one back a tiny bit. Now it's visible. It has this slight wiggle at the end, just really slight wiggle. That's kind of what we want. In terms of this setup, I want to be really gentle and really subtle. Really slight tweak here. I feel like even though the movement is in 10 frames, maybe the 2 frame and 1 frame setup is giving it too much of a abrupt wiggle at the end. So you know what? I want to change it to 3 frames. Let's do 3 frames and then maybe 2 frames. Let's try that. I feel like that 2 on 1 overshoot is kind of like too much. It's a little bit jarring if you just go inside and look really closely. So I think this one looks better now. I would do a 3 frame and then 2 frame setup instead of a 2 on 1. I think that looks pretty cool. So this is also just making sure that we are being responsible for every single frame. We're doing easing and then overshoot on all these keyframes, right? And now we have this coffee machine coming in. We have this croissant coming in, which is good. And I don't want the croissant to come in before, so I'll just offset the layers for now. Let's see. I want this one to come in first, and then maybe around this time here, I'll have the croissant come in. Now, that's pretty good. If I just fit it here, you can see this is the animation we have so far. Everything is coming with some character bouncing a little bit. That's cool.